I froze mid-step when the text appeared on my phone. If you want to come home this weekend, you'll cook the entire Thanksgiving dinner yourself. No hello, no smile. Just her cold command, as if my life was always secondary, always convenient. My daughter, Emily, the girl I raised, the one I thought would carry kindness in her bones. She didn't even pretend anymore. I stood in the doorway of my quiet kitchen, hands still clutching the grocery bag. Outside, the first hints of frost sparkled across the windowsill. But inside, a different kind of chill ran through me, one that came from realization. From knowing I had been invisible to the person I'd trusted most. For years, Emily wrapped her sharp words in compliments, her glares in faux politeness, her entitlement in smiles. Today, she had left the bow off. I let the bag fall to the counter. Slowly, I wiped my hands and breathed, feeling the warmth of the oven behind me, the familiar scent of bread I had baked this morning, the quiet hum of a kitchen that had always been my refuge. I didn't respond, didn't call back, didn't argue. I just stood there, letting the silence fill the space she had once claimed as hers. Then I opened my laptop. Flights Paris, one way, no one waiting. No expectations, no lists, no roles to fill. I let my finger hover over the book button. And for the first time in years, I felt power in my own decisions. Every sacrifice I had made, every dinner I had prepared while she laughed and called it helpful, now fed the energy that pushed me toward this quiet rebellion. And as I booked the flight, a thought crossed my mind. This wasn't just about leaving. It was about finally existing on my own terms, free of someone who thought control was love. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to know, where are you listening from? Tell me your city in the comments so I can see which areas my story is reaching. The oven ticked softly behind me. Outside, frost glimmered. Inside, a fire was finally beginning to rise, not in anger, not in retaliation, but in clarity. And somewhere between the quiet hum of the kitchen and the blinking cursor on my screen, I realized this was the start of my own story. The next morning, the city hummed as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had shifted. I went through the motions of my routine: coffee, shower, folding yesterday's laundry, but my mind replayed every subtle insult, every expectation Emily had piled on me over the years, the invitations she never sent, the thank yous she never gave, the way she looked at me like I was only a prop in her life, never a person in my own. I sat by the window with my mug and let my thoughts drift. The anniversary trips I'd skipped to babysit her children, the kitchen renovations I'd paid for while she smiled as if they were hers, the countless holidays I had baked, decorated, and cleaned through, only to be handed black trash bags with jokes and smirks. Each memory pressed against my chest, sharp and undeniable, but instead of breaking me, it began to clarify something essential. I had been giving my life to others, expectations, and now I could reclaim it. I pulled out a notebook, not for anger, not for whining. I wrote a list, all the ways I had sacrificed, all the quiet labor I had performed, invisible but essential. I labeled every entry carefully: money lent, nights spent awake, repairs handled, trips canceled. Each line was a reminder not of loss, but of leverage, of capability, of intelligence and foresight that no one had ever acknowledged. This ledger was mine, and it was powerful. By mid-afternoon, I was no longer thinking of Emily's command or her entitlement. I was planning. Every decision, every cent I'd saved, every resource at my disposal, I cataloged with care. Flight booked, yes. But beyond that, property deeds, investment accounts, unpaid responsibilities assumed. All of it quietly, legally, irrevocably under my control. This wasn't about revenge in the conventional sense. It was about creating boundaries where there had been none, and letting my own success become the proof that I mattered. I allowed myself one indulgence, a look back through old photo albums. Holidays carefully documented, faces smiling, my presence always at the periphery. I paused on a photo from a Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Emily laughed holding a glass of wine, her family arranged perfectly. And there I was smiling, holding a tray of rolls, invisible by design. My thumb brushed the edge of the photo, and for the first time, I didn't ache. Instead, I smiled quietly, imagining a future where my presence would be chosen, not assumed. That evening, I didn't make a call. I didn't text. I didn't explain myself to anyone. Instead, I opened my laptop again, reviewing legal documents I had tucked away over the years. I checked accounts, verified ownership, confirmed the small pieces of control I already had. Every number, every clause. Every receipt reminded me that empowerment had always been within reach. I just had to claim it. And as the lights of the city twinkled outside my window, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about her at all. It was about me. About standing tall in a world that had tried to minimize me. About letting my cleverness, my intelligence, my quiet resilience shine brighter than any insult, any command, any expectation could ever dim. The morning after my decision, I woke to silence. The kind that felt heavy but electric. No calls, no demands, no lists. I poured coffee slowly, savoring the warmth and bitterness. Outside, the street was quiet. The soft hum of early traffic mixing with the distant chirp of sparrows. Inside, I allowed myself a rare moment, a full, unhurried breath. This day, I decided, would be the first I acted entirely for me. I started with what was mine and always had been. The house deeds tucked in the filing cabinet. The accounts I managed silently. The investments no one suspected I monitored. Emily had assumed entitlement, that I would always smooth her path, cover her mistakes, and support her whims. But her assumptions, I realized, were my leverage. Each document, each account, each hidden little advantage became a tool not for malice, but for assertion. By mid-morning, I was drafting letters careful, precise, legal, but with a subtle edge. Nothing inflammatory. Nothing emotional. Just facts, ownership, confirmation. A reminder that boundaries exist not to be broken. I traced the lines of every signature, every mortgage record, every unpaid utility. My handwriting was steady, deliberate, a quiet declaration. I am capable. I am observant. I am present even when unseen. Lunch passed with me making a simple salad, eating slowly while reviewing the files once more. I recalled past holidays. The way Emily had positioned herself at the center of every gathering. Her laughter loud, her words sharp, her expectations unspoken but clear. And yet, for all her boldness, she had overlooked one key fact. I was patient. I was clever. And I had a memory longer than anyone expected. I began plotting discreet moves, financial adjustments, reassigning certain responsibilities, legally reinforcing my authority in ways subtle, enough to evade immediate detection, but certain enough to create undeniable leverage. Each small step, each check and balance, reinforced the narrative I existed not at her convenience, but by my own design. By evening, I allowed myself a quiet smile. I hadn't confronted, yelled, or even argued. I had simply moved pieces, invisible but immovable. Emily's betrayal, her command, her disregard, her habitual assumption that I would always comply with was a catalyst. And I, patient and meticulous, would turn that catalyst into momentum. I walked through the neighborhood, notebook in hand, detailing possibilities, opportunities she had ignored, advantages she had assumed would never matter. I imagined each scenario carefully, where she would miscalculate, where her ego would blind her, where my quiet interventions would eventually tip the scales. This wasn't revenge in anger. This was revenge through clarity, through preparation, through skill. And as I returned home, city lights glowing faintly against the winter sky, I realized the first stage of my plan had begun. Subtle, quiet, nearly invisible, yet inexorably moving forward. The betrayal that had stung so sharply only yesterday now felt like fuel. Every calculated step I took from here would build the suspense. The drama, the inevitable truth, that power was not loud. It was precise. It was mine. The following morning, I woke with a clarity that surprised me. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't bitter. I was alert, precise, deliberate. Breakfast was simple coffee black. Toast thinly buttered, but each bite tasted of resolve. I revisited my plans, reviewing every small advantage. Every overlooked responsibility Emily had assumed would remain unchallenged. It was almost ironic. She had built her sense of entitlement on the premise that I would always remain passive, and now, that very presumption was my greatest tool. I started quietly. A phone call to the utility company to verify details. A review of investment accounts, checking transfers and authorizations. Notes on every mortgage clause, every joint account, every overlooked signature. I didn't need confrontation yet. Subtlety was far more effective. Each confirmation was a move in a chess game she didn't even know was being played. She believed control was hers. I knew control had always been mine quietly, invisibly. By late morning, I opened the email inbox I rarely checked. There it was, a message from Emily. Sharp, clipped, demanding updates. A list of questions she assumed I would answer immediately. I let it sit. Not ignored in fear or anger, but deliberately. Patience, I reminded myself, was part of strategy. Let her wonder. Let her assume compliance. My delay was a message louder than words. I no longer answered her timetable. Lunch passed with me reviewing old photos, scanning for patterns. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, always meticulous. Always my labor, always credited to her. I traced each image with my finger, silently noting how easily history could be rewritten when one possessed the facts, the documents, the proof. And I had all of it. Every receipt, every contract, every small ledger of my contributions meticulous. Undeniable, quietly accumulating power. Later that afternoon, I visited the neighborhood library. Not for leisure, not for research, but to verify publicly recorded property and financial data I had previously overlooked. Each page one photocopied, each document I cataloged. Felt like bricks laid in the foundation of a quiet but unassailable victory. Emily had underestimated me because she had always measured me by appearances. By the smiles I forced, the silence I tolerated. Now, appearance mattered little. Substance, intelligence, foresight, careful execution would determine the outcome. Evening came, soft and still. I poured a glass of wine and watched the sunset over the city skyline. Reflected in the window, I saw not a woman beaten by betrayal, but a strategist at work. Every small, invisible action taken today built momentum. And I felt it, tangible, inexorable. The first hints of tension were creeping into her world, though she couldn't yet see them. Soon she would. Before bed, I wrote a short note to myself. Power is quiet. Revenge is subtle. Control is collected. I placed it under the stack of documents I had prepared, a reminder and a promise. And as I closed the laptop, the city lights flickered outside. I finally allowed myself a small, private smile. The game had begun. The days that followed were quiet but purposeful. Each small action I took rippled through Emily's carefully constructed assumptions. A missed update here. A delayed response there, nothing aggressive. Nothing confrontational, but enough to sow the first seeds of unease. She assumed I was still compliant, still available, still invisible. Instead, I was everywhere she hadn't looked, quietly realigning my life in ways she would never anticipate. One morning, I opened an old safe deposit box I hadn't visited in years. Dusty, forgotten, but filled with papers, deeds, contracts, and documents that confirmed everything I had ever contributed. Every investment, every payment, every act of quiet loyalty. Emily had never bothered to ask for proof. She had assumed entitlement. That assumption was now my leverage. I photocopied every sheet, cataloged them meticulously, and stored them in a separate folder labeled simply, Unseen Power. By the afternoon, I had begun small, deliberate shifts in the accounts I had quietly managed over the years. Transfers, reassignments, confirmations all legal, all irrevocable, all leaving subtle breadcrumbs of control in my favor. She would notice soon enough, but by then the groundwork would be firmly laid. This was not hasty revenge. This was precision, patience, and the kind of cleverness that leaves no loose ends. As the sun dipped low, I poured a glass of wine and allowed myself a rare indulgence. Looking back at old photos of holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings, I traced the familiar faces, noting patterns and small oversights. Emily had always been the center of the narrative, the one praised and celebrated, while I remained quietly behind the scenes. But now, for the first time, the record was mine. Every receipt, every ledger entry, every contribution meticulously documented. I had proof, not to punish, but to assert the truth of my worth. And in that quiet reflection, I felt a sudden urge to reach out, not to Emily, not to her family, not even to the world, but to you, my viewers. If you're watching this, I want to ask, are you claiming your worth? Or are you letting others define it for you? Hit that subscribe button and join me as I continue to navigate betrayal, empowerment, and the subtle victories that come from strategic choices. Together, we can witness the power of turning betrayal into strength. Later that evening, I sat by the window with a notebook, detailing my next moves. I wasn't acting out of anger. I wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. Each step was calculated, precise, and clever. By the time Emily realized the changes, the momentum would already be undeniable. I allowed myself a private smile. Quiet, controlled, confident. This was my narrative now, and she no longer had the authority to dictate it. The city outside glimmered in the night. I leaned back, sipping my wine, feeling the first taste of liberation. The betrayal that had stung so deeply was no longer a wound, it was fuel. And from that fuel, I was crafting something far more powerful than any fleeting retribution. I was crafting a life that belonged entirely to me. By the 6th morning, I noticed the subtle shifts. Emily's messages had become sharper, impatient, a little more desperate. She assumed she could control the narrative, but the reality was slowly slipping from her fingers. Every account she believed I managed unquestioningly now bore my careful signature. Every property record reflected the truth of my ownership. And every investment she thought she had access to had quietly realigned under my direction. I took my notebook and reviewed the chain of events. The past decade flashed before me, not the warm, polished version Emily wanted the world to see. But the truth, long nights spent baking, cleaning, solving crises, covering mistakes, absorbing insults with a smile I had forced onto my face. And now, for the first time, those sacrifices were not invisible. They were tangible leverage, quietly undeniable. Late in the afternoon, a discovery caught me off guard. Among the papers I had meticulously filed, I found an old contract from a property Emily had recently sold, one she had believed I had forgotten. She had signed the deed transfer, never realizing a clause I had included years ago still granted me certain rights. I sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. A simple legal oversight, unnoticed by her, suddenly became a powerful tool. My pulse quickened not from anger, but from satisfaction. Every careless assumption she had made, every instance of entitlement, was now a calculated opportunity. That evening, as I poured a glass of wine and looked out at the city lights, I thought about the patterns she had created in her life. The entitlement she wore like armor. She had believed I would continue to accommodate her whims. She had assumed silence meant compliance. She had never considered that intelligence, patience, and observation could wield a power far subtler and more effective than confrontation. I drafted another document quietly. No flourish, no emotion. Just facts and evidence, legal but undeniable. I made sure to copy each account, property detail, and financial statement she had assumed was hers to control. Each word was deliberate, each clause precise. By the time Emily discovered what I had done, the outcome would be irreversible. Yet she wouldn't be able to accuse me of malice only, of cleverness, foresight, and truth. The phone buzzed. A message from Emily, curt and clipped. "Why haven't you responded?" "This isn't acceptable." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I let this silence speak, letting her realize for herself that control had quietly slipped away. I sipped my wine, savoring the calm satisfaction of strategy unfolding exactly as intended. Before bed, I opened a small box I had kept hidden, containing notes, photos, and memories of everything I had contributed, all meticulously documented. I ran my fingers over each item, not in bitterness, not in longing, but in triumph. Every act of kindness, every sacrifice, every moment I had been overlooked, was now mine to wield not for revenge and anger, but for empowerment and clarity. And as I closed the box, I whispered to myself, quiet but certain, the story has changed. She assumed I was her pawn. She didn't know I was the player all along. The morning light filtered through my apartment window, soft but insistent, like a spotlight on the life I had quietly reclaimed. Emily's messages continued to pile up, sharp, demanding, increasingly frantic. But now they no longer carry authority. They carried the faint tremor of someone realizing that control, always assumed, was slipping fast. I sipped my coffee, black as usual, and opened my carefully organized folder, property deeds, account statements, contracts, and notes documenting decades of my overlooked contributions. Every item was legal, precise, and indisputable. The time for subtlety was over now. Every clever move I had made, every small, invisible victory, converged into undeniable proof I had been the cornerstone of their world, not the invisible helper they had assumed. I drafted one final set of documents. Not vindictive, not confrontational, just truth laid bare. Names were removed. No drama, no flourish. Policies reinforced, responsibilities clarified. Boundaries that Emily had always ignored were now formally defined. Legally documented, impossible to dispute. I hit send on the emails, filed the documents, and leaned back. A small, private smile curved my lips. The work was complete. Later that afternoon, I took a long walk through the city, letting the cold air clear my thoughts. I passed cafes, bookstores, and parks, observing people moving through, their lives unaware of the drama and tension that had consumed mine for years. And in that moment, I realized the most important revenge was not confrontation. It was thriving quietly, confidently, unapologetically in my own life. Emily's betrayal had sparked a transformation I could never have orchestrated otherwise. I returned home and pulled out a photo from a trip I had postponed years ago for her convenience. I placed it in a frame on my desk, not as a memory of sacrifice, but as a symbol of independence, of reclaiming what had been mine. The city skyline outside gleamed in the fading light. reflecting a world that no longer dictated my worth. That evening, I made a simple dinner for myself. One plate, one glass of wine, one candle flickering softly on the table. I didn't wait for anyone to sit with me. No one called. No one interrupted. The quiet wasn't loneliness, it was triumph. Every decision, every careful move, had led to this, a life governed by my terms, shaped by my intelligence, and freed from entitlement and manipulation. Later, I sat by the window, notebook in hand, reflecting on the journey. The betrayal had been sharp, painful, and personal, but it had not broken me. Instead, it had taught me the value of patience, strategy, and self-worth. I traced my finger along the edge of the notebook and whispered to the quiet room, "I am not invisible. Not anymore." As the city lights shimmered against the night, I closed my notebook, poured another cup of coffee, and allowed myself a long, unhurried breath. The past no longer dictated my life. Every secret, every slight, every betrayal had been transformed into something more powerful than anger, clarity, autonomy, and success. And with a calm smile, I looked out into the darkened streets and whispered to the world, "Until next time." See you in the next video.